Have you ever noticed whenever an election is called, the candidates immediately begin arguing about who are the best economic managers? We'll create the most jobs, they say. We're the best at budgeting. We understand business. We'll be the best economic managers. Of course, the economy is very important, and government is a major player in the economy. It's obvious. But this idea that elected politicians manage the economy and that they're the ones who created all those jobs is kind of funny. After all, Australia is a market economy, a capitalist economy. About 85% of all the goods and services we produce, our total GDP, comes from private business. Only about 15% is produced by government itself, and government-funded agencies like schools and hospitals. Now that 15% is very important, don't get me wrong. We need more of those public services. And what's more, they've created hundreds of thousands of new jobs in recent years. But that's not what politicians usually mean when they boast about being good economic managers. Usually, they're promising to spend less on that stuff, to be more tight-fisted, wrestle the deficit to the ground. I find it especially weird when conservative politicians boast about being good economic managers, because most of the time, they're the ones saying the economy shouldn't be managed. It should be left to private business, so-called market forces, to determine what we produce, how we produce it, and who gets what. That's the whole theory behind privatization, deregulation, free trade agreements, cutting red tape. Get government out of the way, they say, because the private market knows how to do it best. That mindset, by the way, is exactly what produced our current electricity system, dodgy vocational training, and employment services that are in chaos, rivers that have no water in them, and robo-debt. That's the private sector in action right there. But never mind. So when market-oriented politicians boast about how they manage the economy and how many jobs they created, what did they actually do? Did they just get out of the way? Or did they actually do something? Let's set aside that question for now. Let's look at how Australia's economy is actually performing right now, and then we can judge whether it needs better management or not. Let's consider jobs first of all. The current government boasts that it has created over 1 million jobs in the last 5 years. There's that funny phrase again, we created over 1 million jobs. In fact, the only jobs the government itself creates are the ones in the federal public service. And in fact, there were 10,000 fewer of those jobs in 2018, 10,000 fewer people working for the Commonwealth than there were 5 years earlier because of budget cuts and outsourcing. By that measure, therefore, the government didn't create any jobs. In fact, it eliminated some. So even as the government was downsizing its own staff, it took credit for creating all the other jobs in the economy. And there were more than 1 million jobs created in 5 years, 1.1 million to be precise, between 2013 and 2018. But is that count actually impressive? Here's the funny thing. There are over 20 million Australians of working age. And our population is growing fairly quickly, by about 1.75% per year over the last 5 years. That added over 1.5 million people to the working age population. So we actually need to create 1 million jobs every 5 years just to keep up with population growth and prevent unemployment from growing. So 1 million jobs in 5 years is actually a normal state of affairs, not some extraordinary triumph. In fact, the rate of job creation in Australia over the last 5 years was slower than almost any other non-recessionary period since the Great Depression. So there's nothing magic about 1 million jobs in 5 years. It's happened many times in the past, and it has to keep happening. But that raises another issue. What kind of jobs are being created? And it turns out that the quality of work, rather than the quantity of work, has been deteriorating. Almost half of those 1 million new jobs were part-time. That means the share of Australians in part-time work is still going up, and many part-timers want and need more hours. In essence, the labor market has taken the total amount of work available and divided it up into smaller and smaller parcels. Instead of full-time jobs, we get part-time jobs with fewer hours. And if it weren't for that reduction in the average hours worked per job, Australia would not have gained those 1 million jobs over 5 years, we would have fallen far short of that target. And the total amount of work available for each working age Australian, on average, actually shrank during the last 5-year period. So there's less work per person than there used to be. Other indicators of job quality have also gone downhill in the last 5 years. Casual work has grown, temporary jobs and labour hire are more common, and the number of Australians holding multiple jobs just to make ends meet has reached an all-time record high. How much workers get paid is another crucial issue, and on that score, Australia has definitely gone backwards. In fact, since 2013, wage growth in Australia has fallen to the slowest sustained pace since the end of the Second World War. Wages have been growing along at about 2% a year, much slower than the 3, 4, or 5% annual wage gains that we took for granted in previous years. Of course, it's not just wages that go up, prices go up as well, and wages have been barely keeping pace. That means real wages, our wages relative to the prices of what we buy, have hardly grown at all. Here's a surprising picture. Since 2013, under the current government, real weekly wages have barely changed. That compares to average increases in real wages of 1.5% per year under the previous government, Prime Ministers Gillard and Rudd, and 1.3% on average under Prime Minister Howard. So, does the government's economic management explain the zero real wage growth over the last 6 years? Well, in some ways it does. Because even though the government doesn't really manage the economy and it doesn't really create those jobs, it does set the rules under which wages are determined. And several of the government's policy measures have certainly contributed to the unprecedented slowdown in Australian wages, including a very strict cap on wage increases for their own workers, but many other rules as well. We could run through a lot of other indicators of how well Australia's economy has been managed, or perhaps mismanaged. Economic growth has slowed down to almost zero at present. We might actually be heading into a recession, the first in 28 years. In per person terms, the economy is already shrinking. Very weak consumer spending is another key problem. Consumer spending makes up half of our total GDP, and now we've got the slowest growth in spending in 6 years. Weak wages are the major reason. Weak economic growth, weak consumer spending, weak wage growth. It all adds up to very low rates of inflation. In fact, inflation right now in Australia is running at 0%, and that's not actually a good thing. It means prices could start falling. Economists call that deflation, and it usually goes hand in hand with a very bad recession. In theory, if the economy was truly managing itself, then private business investment would be leading the way. But the last 6 years have been the worst for business investment since World War II, despite a supposedly business-friendly group of economic managers in Canberra. All in all, Australia's economy is in pretty rough shape right now. That's not solely because of the government, but it certainly played a role. So, the next time you hear someone talking about good economic management, set that rhetoric aside. Instead, ask yourself, is my family better off? Is my job secure? Are my wages rising? Is my community in good shape? And can I depend on my public services, healthcare, education, income supports? After all, that's what the economy is supposed to be about in the first place. Work, inclusion, security, shared prosperity. And that's true no matter who's managing it. For more statistics on job creation, job quality, and wages, please see our website, futurework.org.au.